Welcome back to Bigfoot Week here at We Are Change. We have another mind-blowing interview for you today with guest Russell Acord, one of the hosts of Expedition Bigfoot. You'll be amazed at what he has to share. So joining me is Russell. He was selected to be on Expedition Bigfoot. It's a pleasure to have him on the show. How are you going there?
Great, thank you for having me.
You're more than welcome. So how did that all eventuate, being on the travel series?
Great, absolutely wonderful experience. I was picked out of, I imagine there were quite a few that were gone through. Why they picked me, maybe they needed an old guy with a military background, I'm not sure, but it was luck, that's for sure.
Yeah, very exciting. So, yeah, explain to the viewers a little bit about your background, please.
Been doing research since the early 70s. I started out in the Bitterroot Mountains of Montana, been all over Montana, then I migrated into Idaho, Washington, done quite a bit in California and Oregon, both back east in Ohio as well as Florida. When I was in the military, there were a lot of, I actually got to do a little bit of research overseas when I was in the military as well. It seems to be the legend that goes global. It seems to be everywhere. So it was fairly simple to do in other countries as well. It was great.
Very impressive, your military experience, and that gives you credibility for a subject like this, doesn't it?
So it's you kind of cut out the fear factor and you stop worrying about what's out in the wilderness. One of the earliest lessons learned from me before I got in the military is my dad would take me out in the wild, and we would identify sounds, that were around us in the wilderness.
Yeah.
And then he would take me to the exact same place in the dead of night, and the exact same sounds that we'd already identified. He said, if you heard that and didn't know what it was, that would be frightening, wouldn't it? But knowing what it was, the night no longer scared me. It was great.
Some people have claimed to hear a low guttural scream or a yelling, and they've attributed that to some type of great ape or beast. That's a common occurrence over there, isn't it?
You hear a lot of things in the forest that are unexplained. I've heard a lot of things, but I've never had a Class A experience. I've never actually had eyes on an actual walking, living, breathing Bigfoot. And with that, a lot of the things that I have heard in the wilderness, I've heard bear, I've heard mountain lions, I've heard everything you can imagine. And there's just a vast amount of sound ranges that you can get out of the forest. And I've heard things that I cannot identify, that's for sure.
Yeah, very mysterious. And with your tracking experience, how has technology helped in trying to locate this creature?
Well, if you've watched Expedition Bigfoot, you'll see that I've actually brought in some of the stuff that I really enjoy working with. Being in the military, I used the night vision goggles, the PBS 7s, that they're very, very good. You can just have that, everything looks green around you, and it's like walking in the daylight, only green. The other thing that I've added to my toolbox that I'm really happy with is the thermal imaging. You can only see so much through a PBS 7 or through night vision goggles through the green, but if you have a balance change in the air and the temperatures, and you see something glaring back at you that is putting out a tremendous heat temperature, you might not have been able to see that through the night vision goggles. So pairing the two has been really, really instrumental.
Very much so. It's groundbreaking research, and picking up a heat signature with the thermal imaging, that's a clear indication that there is something roaming around, and you can pick up the pattern, the whole body, and you can it comes into the picture, and that must be very exciting when you can see that on the screen.
There's been some things that it doesn't take long to identify a deer or an elk or a bear or that sort of thing, but when it's something that's like we found in the show that was just tremendous size, that put out a very, very hot thermal image, not being able to identify that by just its shape was really that was exciting. I haven't felt that kind of excitement in a long time. That was pretty cool.
That's excellent. Some people say it could be a descendant of the Gigantopithecus, another ape that was roaming around. It could be a similar lineage. Is that what you believe?
You know, I haven't really put it in a box, so to speak, you know, that it has to be this. I believe that it would be flesh and blood. That's one thing that I've kind of stood with, is the flesh and blood. But then there's always that other side of things that they say that they're interdimensional, or that they can move through time and space. And that's a little tougher for me to grasp that, but I won't discard it. I'm not going to say, well, that's hogwash, because my theory has not been proven yet either. So you don't know. I want to say that it's flesh and blood. It would be a descendant of human, descendant of ape, or maybe a something that mixed along the way years ago. We know for a fact that there were cavemen way back in the day. So maybe there's a lost tribe that we've yet to discover. I don't know. There's so many theories out there. It's kind of fun to kind of wrestle with all of them.
It certainly is. And Willow Creek, the famous place where Patterson and Gimlin shot the footage, that's become a big tourist attraction now. People flock there in droves, don't they? They want to get a piece of the action.
It looks so much different now than it did in 1967. You know how the growth and the trees that were little tiny saplings this tall you got to climb them. They're just big giant trees now. It's been quite some time. So what are we, 53 years now? 53 years. So there's a lot of growth in 53 years. So but it's been well taken care of by a group called the Bluff Creek Project. They keep the trail cleared. They can, if you get close, there are some of them that will actually walk you down to the site to show you, you know, kind of give you the history and the layout and where, you know, certain landmarks are. I took Bob Gimlin there last year.
Wow.
He hadn't been there in quite a few years. We walked him down the trail, let him stand there, and I actually got some pictures and did a little bit of film work, because I do film work. Did some film work of him actually walking the same trail that he and Roger had walked 53 years ago. And it was kind of neat to see him walk that path, and then he also walked the same path that Patty had walked so many years ago. So it was kind of a nostalgic, kind of a fun piece of history that I was able to get on film there. It was a blast.
That's incredible. And they say Roger Patterson, he might have been a bit down on his luck at the time when he captured that footage, but that doesn't negate the fact that it is one of the most incredible pieces of film that we've ever seen. You can see the muscles moving underneath the skin, and you can see the calf, the back shoulder blades. There's no way that they could have replicated that. They didn't have the Hollywood costumes and the technology to be able to pull that off back then. So it's very much one of the most important pieces of film the world has ever seen, isn't it?
I agree. But even now with the girls wearing leggings and tight spandex, that sort of thing, that was not in existence in 1967. And to have something that form-fitting that would stretch and move with the body just wasn't around. So you're right, seeing the flexing of the muscles and the even when the head turned, there was no movement or rippling of any kind of a costume, or even that was during the time when they were building the movie called The Planet of the Apes. And they had such a difficult time with the seams and the wrinkling of the skin and everything that they actually put you remember on the movie, they actually put a vest on them, and that, so they were able to conceal that sort of thing. So if your best Hollywood producers had so much money at their fingertips to build the latest and greatest and the best, couldn't even hide that, then you're right. The Patterson-Gimlin film was well ahead of its time, if that's what it was.
Yes. And there was a few imposters that stepped forward. They claimed to be the one wearing the costume, but when it came down to the crunch, they couldn't even pick the location. They didn't even know where it was filmed. So a lot of people try and jump in. They want to get some attention off this. A lot of people are seeking that out, aren't they?
I did 4 months ago. There's a guy who actually said that he was wearing the costume. His name is Bob Hieronymus, or Robert Hieronymus. I told him that I was doing a documentary. I told him that, look, I talk with Bob Gimlin all the time, and I'm doing a documentary, and I've listened to Bob talk. I said, but the best thing that I can do is you don't decide a court case without seeing and letting everybody talk from both sides. So he allowed me to come into his home, set up my camera, and I interviewed him for several hours. And his story was very interesting. And when I finally put that story out and put the whole film together, it will be one of those things that, like you and I or anybody else, you listen to both sides of it, you decide for yourself, and I'm not doing it to convince you of Bob Gimlin or Bob Hieronymus. I just want you to see what both individuals have to say and let the chips fall where they need to.
Very well said, and a great approach. Now, people have sent off fur and bits of hair to the laboratory, and they've done the DNA sequencing, and it's very close to human beings. That was an incredible discovery, wasn't it?
Even today, I get, last month I had 3 hair samples sent to me, 3 different hair samples. And if you have several in a group, if you have just a cluster of hair samples, the first thing I do is I peel one off and I light it on fire. And you know the smell of hair burning, or you can see it'll actually grab a flame and roll if it's nylon or man-made. It's a completely different smell. Out of those 3 samples, one of them was immediately discarded as man-made polyester or synthetic. So it was dismissed immediately. The second one was I looked at it through my microscope, and it's the same as a horse hair. It was just some of the smaller bits of horse hair. The third one is the interesting one, and we're still actually looking at that. I will only take it so far, and then because there's quite a few samples of this cluster, so I will only take it so far as I can go with it, and then I will send a portion of that to a lab, but that's quite expensive. But I've not been able to find anything on our database that matches it. So it's actually kind of exciting, and that was something from back east, back in Illinois, Ohio, Kentucky, back in that area there somewhere.
Well, that's exceptional, and people are always concerned about having the items confiscated or it going missing in the lab. They try and cover up a lot of evidence. They want to suppress the information from the public as well. That's very alarming. And
the samples that I have were given to me by someone he only gave me a portion of his sample. The sample that I have, I will only give a portion of that away. That way we have 2 stages backup if it happens to disappear, and you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So we protect that kind of evidence pretty tightly back here.
Yeah, and in the States, tens of thousands of sightings, and some of them, it's just amazing. And the footage as well, people have explained they've seen a big male and a couple of cubs crossing the road, and then they were able to flee really quickly in a way that a human, it wouldn't have been possible to get that much ground covered in that distance in such a short time. So, it's unlike anything they've ever seen. Many accounts from credible people, sightings, a lot of families as well. They're having lunch, picnics, and they're messing around with the camera, and they capture something in the distance. They've zoomed in, and it's just really incredible stuff, isn't it?
It is. I think when you have gatherings, like you said, families, mother, father, children, that sort of thing, I think that this creature is curious. They definitely, they don't want to be seen. They don't need our help to stay hidden, but I think they're curious. I think they are intrigued by the sounds and the things that we do and the smells that come off of our clothes, our food, our equipment, that sort of thing. Not curious enough to want to just walk right into camp and sit down and have breakfast, but they are curious enough to where I think it could be that they're keeping an eye on us to see how much we are encroaching on their space. You know, how much further back they need to go and to continue avoiding our eyesight, our line of sight.
Because they are very territorial and they don't like their habitat threatened. That's why.
Nobody does.
That's right. Exactly. And some people have been in remote areas and they've heard rocks and other stones and branches being thrown at their RV. And, you know, they notice, hang on, there couldn't be any humans out here. Who keeps throwing that? So that's a very much a sign too, isn't it?
Yeah, you hear of the rock clacks, the tree knocking, the guttural sounds, the howl. There are so many indicators that would either be to warn us away or to warn others that we were close. You know, maybe that's the vocalization to let others know that don't come close to where I'm at. There's humans close by, and it's not safe here.
Yeah.
I hardly think that they would make a noise that loud to that's pretty much giving themselves away.
Yeah.
I think it's for the others' benefit, not for ours.
Now, a large percentage of the Bigfoot community, they want this beast killed so they can study it further and then conserve its habitat and protect it so they can have proof that it exists. And then another percentage, they want to protect it, just have it on film and not harm it whatsoever. What's your stance on that?
I do not think we ever need a dead body to prove the existence of anything. I do not agree with, you know, if you see something, it's like the last, let's just pretend that there's only one left on the planet, and we're ignorant enough to stick a bullet through it, and we've just destroyed everything we've just destroyed it all. And we tend to do that as humans. We tend to just tear up everything that comes in our path. No, I do not agree with taking the life of it, dissecting it, and figuring out what makes it tick, because that could be the very last specimen on Earth. So you don't want to do that. I think that we will be able to get enough evidence with our technology, through footprints, hair, stool, video, find one, just without having to destroy it. You know I exist, but you don't need to take my life to prove it.
Because there has been many people stepping forward, at least half a dozen, and they've stated that they have killed one on their land. Some people hunting. One person even claimed he had the whole body. So I mean, some of it you don't know how credible these people are, but because you know they tend to seek out some people that you know are a little bit not quite right.
There's a guy I know. His name is Rick Dyer. He is the guy who went. Yep, Rick Dyer and I, outside the Bigfoot piece of it, Rick Dyer, he and I are friends.
Mm-hmm.
I don't, and the thing is he's going to look you in the eye and say it was all BS. I didn't kill anything. I put this thing, stuffed it full of this costume, I stuffed it full of stuffing, and I froze it in a block of ice, and I made a ton of money so that people could come in the room and look at it. I didn't kill anything.
Mm-hmm.
And his mindset still, he says, there's no such thing as Bigfoot. That kind of guy, you hate him, but you love him, because he's honest enough to tell you that he didn't kill anything and that he is hoaxing. He's all full of crap. He's only in it for the money. But then you hate him because he's making the real research look bad. Myself, I appreciate the fact that he was honest enough with me to tell me it was for attention and for money, nothing more. That I can respect. I don't respect the methods. I don't like how he went about it. But the fact that There are people that say that they've killed something, but zero, nobody has come forward and put something out there that was absolute. It's always a picture, or, well, I buried it, so I don't have it. If you have the largest gold nugget in Australia, you're not going to bury it and just tell people you found it. You know, you're going to capitalize on that because of the value of something like that to society. So I have a hard time buying the I killed Bigfoot stories. When I hear that, it sounds more like I made up a Bigfoot killing story to get some attention.
Great explanation, and I'm glad you cleared that up for the viewers. Now, in saying that, there has been a lot of trade that's been going on. People have been leaving gifts on stumps for this beast, and in return, they've left something as well. Now, you have witnessed this type of behavior as well, haven't you?
I've seen it, but here's the upside down piece of that. I do not gift. I think that when you leave food in the forest in hopes that something will come and take it, or that's called baiting. You don't want to bait something because that's going to draw everything. Something took my apple. Well, a deer will take an apple. So will a squirrel and just about anything else. So it doesn't mean that that was Bigfoot that took it. When somebody leaves something shiny or something of value on a stump, and that thing disappears and something else appears in its place, maybe that part, I've not witnessed anything like that. I've always heard the story, but generally, I hate to say this and put it in this little box, but generally what I'm finding is, let's just say I have 10 stories. Out of those 10 stories, 9 of them are people that talk about it. And they say, well, I go up to this location here and in this campground that a lot of people go through, and I always put this little shiny coin on top of the stump. And every time I come back, I find 2 little sticks that are in an X in its place. Well, if you're making that known that that's what you're doing, and you're dying for the attention, basically, if you go put a dime on a stump and everybody in town knows you're doing that, you know, it's something that somebody could have a lot of fun with at your expense. So I don't, unless you have a camera that shows something going up and removing your gift and replacing it with theirs, I have a hard time putting any stock in that theory.
Yeah, that's a good point too. People can play into that just to get a rise out of people, very much so. Now, some people say this beast is carnivorous. It tears animals limb from limb, completely opens up the insides, takes out the heart, kidneys, and other organs. Others say it's a herbivore and it eats plants and berries. What's your take on that, Russell?
I think, okay, so let's just look at sheer size, okay? The sheer size of these things, let's just pretend they weigh 1,000 pounds. To keep something that weighs 1,000 pounds alive and well in the forest, it's going to take a significant amount of food intake. So you have deer, elk, and bear that also, a big bear gets up there in weight. Elk, you know, you're talking, you know, 700, 800, 900 pounds, 1,000 pounds. An elk will eat grass all day long, and there's no wake in its path where you knew that the elk was there. It's just feeding off of the leaves and everything along the way, because it's quite plentiful in the forest. If it's tearing apart animals from limb to limb, I see more damage by wolves or bear than I ever would by anything else. Generally, if I see something has been torn apart, you can tell what took it apart. And generally, it's either bear or wolves. And even at that, it's not that common. In late fall, they'll take down the slowest or the weakest elk and feed on it before they go into hibernation. And there's bear tracks to substantiate what you've just found, what ate it and what took it down. I've never seen an elk, a deer, or any other flesh animal laying in the woods that had been consumed and found Bigfoot tracks around it. Not once, not ever.
That's very interesting. That gives you an insight into the eating habits. And some of the branches and the trees they've found snapped. Some people, that could be an indication that it's trying to send a signal. We're in this direction. This is where we're located. This is where we're feeding. And it gives a bit like a sign to tell the others this is where they're at. Do you think that's what that is, or?
It could be that. It could be territorial. It could be warnings to. Now we don't know what goes on in their minds, and they don't know what goes on in ours. So for us, I don't want somebody on my property, so I put "do not trespass." That's my torn branch, or that's my twisted tree. That's my way of telling people stay away from my territory. Maybe that's their way. You know, we mark our territory, we communicate so much differently. It could be to communicate with their own. It could be to, maybe they're thinking that it's to warn us to stay away.
I think that's a very plausible scenario.
Yep.
Heavy branches snapped. That could be an indication that there's a male in the area. So that if they don't want any confrontation, they should stay clear of that.
Bears do it.
Yes.
They mark their own territory by, you know, and elk, not so much. They'll rub the velvet from their antlers, but we all leave our mark. Maybe that's just their signature, you know.
And the Bigfoot nesting is very interesting as well. They've made bedding, and it looks like they've made some sort of makeshift home, haven't they? And you've looked into this phenomenon, haven't you?
I have. So I've written a couple books, and I've always had my own theory as far as how they survive and where they live and that sort of thing. But I am learning a lot. If you and I go camping, we're going to make a structure that we can lay on top of because we prefer a soft bedding. We're going to also provide something over top of us, a canopy over top of us, to keep the elements of the night off of us if it rains or it happens to snow. So we do the over and under type of nesting. It seems like in the gorillas in the jungles, that sort of thing, they build a nest that's strictly on the ground. And it looks like, from what I've seen, they look like a bird nest that you'd find in a tree, just a big giant bird nest laying on the ground. And it's soft and it's comfortable. So when I found a nest on Expedition Bigfoot, there was materials underneath and on top. And that was something more like you and I would make. So my first thought was, holy cow, they're either a man made this, or if something else made it, it's because in the jungles, it's warm. And if the rain comes down, it doesn't freeze you to death. Where we were, the temperatures get quite cold at night. So maybe this is theory. This is all just theory. So maybe it could have been one of those things where the elements were coming in, do some overhead protection, and crawl in and go to sleep and just rest. That's just a guess. But from what I've seen, talking with Adam Davis from England, talking with Dr. Maria Mayer, talking with Dr. Jeff Meldrum, the nest on the ground seems to be the indicator, or seems to be the common denominator, so to speak.
And they are very elusive. Do you think we're getting closer to actually finding one? And if so, do you think it should be placed in captivity like at the zoo?
Oh, no. I do believe we're getting close to finding one, yes. I think that it's like the it's like the lottery or the odds at a casino. You keep gambling, eventually something's going to break loose.
Yeah.
If we get close enough to one to capture it, I hope we don't do that. I think that is, it would be like someone coming into my house and saying, oh, wow, we found a human specimen. We're going to take your wife or your kid and we're going to take them and put them on display in our forest. I wouldn't like that. I think that it would be, it's a bad case scenario.
Yep. Yes, well, for the overall benefits and for the quality of the life of the animal, it's best to have it in the wild, very much so.
Agreed.
Now, with so many sightings, there's thousands of reports. If only 10% were true and correct, then that's definite proof in itself, isn't it, that this is roaming around?
Even if I wasn't hearing that many stories, if you look historically look backwards instead of forward sometimes. Sometimes it's good to take a look behind you and see the history of the writing on the walls in the cave, the lore spoken from generation to generation in Native Americans and in other countries, even from generation to generation, of the hairy man or the hairy beast. There's too much, like any court case, there's entirely too much evidence to walk away and dismiss it and say there's no such thing. There's just too much out there.
Exactly. And it makes for many great stories too when people are at the tavern and the pub, and that's where a lot of people, after a couple of drinks, they feel a little bit more confident to come out and explain some of the sightings, because a few people, they're very withdrawn and they're reluctant to come forward about it, especially if they're in a position of power within their community. So when you have more shows like Expedition Bigfoot and other shows and documentaries, it gives it more credibility, and then people feel more courage to step forward and explain what they've seen. So it's a remarkable thing you're doing, and it's groundbreaking research, isn't it?
It is. I appreciate you saying that. The other platform in which people can discuss their findings or share that information would be at conferences. We do conferences where people can do that. I had one scheduled for September, but like we had talked earlier before the show, is we're in the middle of a situation, a pandemic, where people are not comfortable gathering in large groups or not comfortable with a virus that you can't see. So this year I had to cancel my conference, which was heartbreaking, but any opportunity to get to a conference and talk to other people that have been researching or listen to testimonies that are profound. Some of the people that I've heard testimonies from are people that I trust completely. Good people that have nothing to gain by coming off with just a wild story that doesn't make sense.
Yes. And I urge everyone to, go camping, get amongst the wilderness, go looking for Sasquatch. Even if you don't come across anything unusual, at least you got to experience nature, and that's very important too, isn't it?
You're absolutely right. I've always said the same thing you just did. Sometimes I'll get people at work will say, so you're going out for Bigfoot this weekend, and I'll kind of make a joke about it. And to me, it's like, okay, I'll go along with this. Yeah, that's kind of fun to joke around about. But you find a hobby or something that you would rather do that doesn't include such great scenery and wonderful air to breathe and just being out with nature. You can't beat that. It's the best place to be.
It sure is. And some people, they claim that the evolution of this animal, maybe it once lived in trees, and Zachariah Sitchin have said they came down from the trees, they were hungry, they started flipping over cow pats, they might have eaten some hallucinogenic mushrooms, and that expanded their consciousness, and then they started eating a lot of animals and meat, and that increased the brain activity. So if you can, yeah, you trace back through history the evolutionary descendants, and it even states that humans and these Neanderthals lived side by side even at one point in history. So there's no denying it, and I'm sure people would be starting to take it seriously now. What sort of feedback have you got when you explain your journey through the research and the discoveries that you've found? How are people taking that on?
It's interesting. It's always mixed emotions from people. You get the naysayers that, you know, will just, Bigfoot, that's not real. You're just chasing your tail. And then you get some people that will look at you and say, wow, that's interesting, and they still don't say anything, but they're looking at you thinking, boy, there's something I wanted to say to you, you know. So I've found that a lot of times when you separate people, and they'll find you later and they'll say, hey, you know, there was a bunch of people around. I didn't want to really say anything, but when I was growing up, I can't count how many times a story starts off with this. When I was growing up, my grandpa swore he saw Bigfoot while he was out logging. And it's really neat to hear these stories surface like that. You know, these people that know that, you know, sometimes grandpa will pull your leg, sure. But sometimes grandpa was a no BS kind of guy. And when you hear that these people are, you know, they talk about this very, very detailed, visceral experience of grandpa that smelled something, saw something, of what it threw, and the strength that it showed, or the speed and agility in which it traveled, and scared the crap out of grandpa. That makes you think. You know, this is a lot of people have been shoulder to shoulder with people that know or have seen or have an experience. So there's more people that know about it that aren't talking about it than are.
That's right. And they carry those stories close to their heart for the rest of their lives. So it has deep significance to them, doesn't it?
Yep.
People
Yes,
have taken a plaster cast of the footprints. They've seen the dermal ridging. They've even seen scar tissue as well. So, I mean, that's incredibly difficult to try and fake something like that. When you can actually see they've trod on something sharp, maybe a jagged rock, and it's cut part of the foot. And then the skin, the way it's formed, there's a definite scar pattern there. Have you seen a lot of plaster casts of footprints?
I've seen quite a few. I have. And the thing is, sadly, there are a few that when you see right away, they disappoint you, because you know that they were. You can't look at somebody and say this is BS, because if you got to have a guy that finds a footprint in the ground, he doesn't know if somebody else put it there. He's just going on what he's faced with in the evidence. So he will cast it, and he'll bring it and have someone look at it. And when you can see wood grain in it, then that's the disappointing part. When you see, I'm going to challenge you to do something. Go look into, look at the feet of the Aborigines, the people who don't own shoes. They literally live on the hot sand or in the jungle with no shoes. And the amount of callus that grows on the bottom of their feet, it's as strong as you and I wearing a really solid, thick moccasin. So callus wears different than skin. So when people say dermal ridges, callus is not going to have as pronounced dermal ridges as we do in our fingertips and our shoes, because we're wearing a soft sock and a boot. When I see it now, I've only seen in my lifetime, I've only seen 5 or 6 footprints that I will look at and say, I think these are real. I think these are legitimate, real. And they don't have a real strong dermal ridge. They have the scar tissue and the thick torn skin callus, like you would find on your feet and the rough parts of your hand. The dermal ridges are not as pronounced because they're taking a beating every day through the soil as you walk among whatever sharp edges there are. And callus wear is different than our skin, our soft skin would. So it's find a footprint, look at the bottoms of the feet. I wonder if we can actually pull it up on the internet, but the bottoms of the feet of the Aborigines. And it's vastly different than if you look at the bottom of your own feet, and we're the same thing. We're the same. We're human.
That's a very good comparison.
Yep.
Yeah, excellent to put that in contrast for people as well. And if you look at the sightings and where they are on the map, there's clusters of them, and they're often in the same areas. You look at Washington, Oregon, and you can see, so there's the species, and sometimes they're migrating as well, but often in the same areas, aren't they?
Yeah. I have I can't say the guy's name, but I did talk to an individual who is telling me that he's going to take me to a spot where a couple of his friends had a sighting. Now, he said that these friends of mine have no reason whatsoever to say anything that is not true. These guys have been my buddies for a long time, and they don't lie to me. But they said they saw a sighting, and they kind of struggling with it. What's funny is when they went into town to talk to somebody about it, which was on the reservation, and they were afraid to kind of bring it up because they thought somebody's going to make fun of us. One of the people in the town who's been around for a very long time said, yeah, this is a trackway. This is their migration path. Of course you saw them. This is the time of year when they're moving. And acted as casual as you and I would talk about going for a drink at a pub. It was nothing surprise, nothing new to these people. So I thought that was very interesting. And I do look forward to doing that bit of research.
Yes, it really is fascinating. And even if you look at some of the rock carvings and paintings, some of the Native American Indians have carved out. They've even got a creature, and it's a clear depiction of this beast, isn't it?
Yep, it's always much larger than the human that are standing in front of it. It's wild because, like I said, historically, this has been around much longer than you and I have been here.
It really is brilliant. And some of the museums around Willow Creek, they'd definitely be worth venturing out and looking at some of the artifacts.
Yep, absolutely. They have a Bigfoot museum right there in Willow Creek. It's about an hour or so drive to get to Bluff Creek from there, where the sighting is. But if you ever get a chance to get out there, or do you ever get out here? Do you ever get a chance to get out here?
I'd love to at one point in time, definitely. It's on the list, but I haven't got round to that journey yet. But that'd be a dream come true, wouldn't it, for a lot of people? And retracing those steps, that would have been really awe-inspiring and amazing. And it would have given you a lot of motivation to continue your research as well.
Yeah. If you ever get out here, let me know, and I'll when we get off the phone here, I will give you, or when we get off this interview, I will text you my phone number to where if you ever make it to U.S. soil, give me a call. And if we're ever in any place where we're close enough we can see each other, I'll try to grab Bob Gimlin himself and come meet you.
That's a tremendous honor, and I thank you so very much for that offer. That's unbelievable. And yeah, wow, that's a dream come true, hearing something like that. I've always been studying this ever since I was a teenager. It was one of the first subjects. You'd see it on the History Channel and other documentaries. Is it real? And you just get lost in these films. And the way it's presented, it's brilliant. So I thank you very much. If people wanted to find more about Expedition Bigfoot and your work as well, how would they go about doing that?
Expedition Bigfoot will be on, there's a Facebook page on Expedition Bigfoot. There are a couple out there, and just like I said a little while ago, there are people who are not as kind to the Bigfoot world as others. We have Expedition Bigfoot fan page, and it ends in a period. Fan page, period. And that is our fan page, and that's for the people that run that are actually the 4 cast members of the show. We don't allow any bad talk. We don't allow anything that is inappropriate. It's just not, it's not classy. So in order to find more about Expedition Bigfoot, that's a good place to find it. I'm pretty easy to find. I have a website called russelacord.com, russellacord.com. You can find my books there. You can find Quarter 13, where you can actually book a meeting with Bob and other researchers. It's just, it's a small world. You know, people are usually pretty accessible. So, and I'm easy enough to find. You found me.
Yeah, I sure did. I'll put all the links in the description.
Okay.
So people can locate those platforms there, as long as I'm sure people will bring their manners as well and keep an open mind.
Absolutely.
Yeah, very insightful broadcast, and I thank you very much for appearing on the program. You're welcome back anytime with any new discoveries. All the best.
I appreciate it.
Terrific.
Thank you so much.
Well, that does it for today's show. Consider becoming a patron. Help fund this operation and expose corruption. Your generosity is very much appreciated. Be sure to like, share and subscribe, and catch me on the next episode of the We Are Change talk show.